Hi, I want to talk today about a very unique challenge within complex trauma recovery. And it's that what happens with complex trauma often within people is they have what we call a regress part and a progress part. So there's a part of them that stops growing. They might be in a 40-year-old body, but there's still part of them that feels like a 5-year-old. There's still part of them that responds emotionally like a 5-year-old. It's like they're stuck. Whereas there's other parts of them that are very progressed. And so you will get some people in complex trauma, and so they get very progressed, they get very intellectual, great in sports, and then they don't like social stuff. They just avoid social stuff. But they're great thinkers. They're great on computers. They're really great in individual stuff. They don't like a whole lot of change. They don't like a whole lot of going into situations where they don't know every detail about what's going to happen. That's too scary for them. So they go into this what looks like, wow, they are so advanced in this area. They are so wonderful in this area, but they're progressed in one area and regressed in another area. What happens for many people is they go through their life, their adult life, and they learn kind of how to live and get along fairly well and do fairly well. But all of a sudden, things start happening where this regressed part gets triggered, or something triggers this regressed part. And all of a sudden, this 40, 50-year-old is acting like a 5-year-old. All of a sudden, they're going back to these tools that this regress part has never got beyond. And so now they're pouting, they're having a temper tantrum, they're doing all the things that a 2-year-old would do. And that begins to cause all kinds of problems in their relationships. It causes them to hurt those they love the most. And so I want to just talk about this regress part and this progress part that happens within complex trauma, because it creates this dichotomy within a person that is so important to understand. It's like there's two people living in the same body. So what we know is that trauma interrupts the normal processes of development in a child. So the child is developing, trauma hits, and then part of the child goes to fight, flight, freeze. Part of the child goes to fawn. And so that can look like regressed and progressed. But they stop growing and developing the normal, healthy tools that a child would develop if they didn't have the trauma, if they had parents to help them learn all the different tools for dealing with life, social, relationship. So basically, they go to a form of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and that looks like regression or progression. But they're all maladaptations that are dominating. So the regress part, that can show up in emotional skills, that can show up in social skills, that can show up in cognitive functioning. But so can the progress part. It can show up in cognitive, it can show up in social, it can show up in emotional. But the repressed part, they get stuck at an earlier stage of development in those areas. They develop coping mechanisms of that age that are fight, flight, freeze, maladaptations, and they get stuck there. And so whenever certain stresses or fears are triggered, they go back to those stages in that child. So that's why so many people with complex trauma who can be so successful and be doing so well in much of life, they can still feel that they're a child in certain areas. They can still have their spouse or other people say, wow, in certain situations, you still act like a 5-year-old. You have the emotional maturity of a 5-year-old. And that's this repressed part. So let me say it another way. If you think of a toddler growing up, So they grow up and they don't get their own way, and they have a little temper tantrum, or they lose their puppy and they go into uncontrollable tears, or they get really impulsive about things. They act before they think, and all of those things. So those are part of growth stages. But if parents are there to help them grow, then they learn how to handle not getting their own way. They learn how to grieve in a way that they're not stuck in when they lose a puppy. They learn how to control impulses. They grow beyond that. But what happens for some is they get stuck. So now whenever they don't get their own way, even at 40, they still have a temper tantrum. They still pout. They still get impulsive. They still cry uncontrollably. So they're still stuck at that level of the toddler in responding to situations. And so it's realizing that the trauma that happened at that young age disrupted their emotional growth. The parents didn't help them process the trauma and get the tools to learn how to cope with it and get past it and grow through it. They got imprisoned by it. They got stuck by it. And now it causes problems in their adult life when that gets triggered, in their relationships, in their work, and even it can send them into great guilt. It can send them into hating themselves, into this strong internal critic. So let me just give you some of the examples. So we talked about what happens in you if you don't get your own way. Let me give you another example. Let's say that when you were little, you had a really bad experience in the hospital. And now going to a hospital, you either faint or all of a sudden you're in panic mode and you're thinking of every excuse not to go to the hospital. What happens to you? Or you had bad experiences when you had to phone agencies and they gave you a hard time and they made you feel stupid and all of that. And so now as an adult, whenever you have to make a phone call to an agency, you feel like a 5-year-old, you begin to act like that 5-year-old, you avoid, you pout, you try to get others to make the phone call for you. All of those things, you're still stuck at that thing. Or you have to go to a social setting and you don't know most of the people. You don't know how to communicate, make small talk, have those kind of conversations. And so you're freaking out. You're doing everything you can to get out of it. You go and you just spend all the time in a corner on your phone. And it's not just because you're an introvert. It's because you never learned the tools. And so now when you're in those situations, you go back to being that 5-year-old again. Or somebody criticizes you. Where do you go? Do you go to pouting? Do you go to just wanting to isolate? Or somebody sets a boundary with you and you feel rejected. How do you respond? Many go back to being very childlike in those times. Or you sense tension in a conversation that's happening in the room. What happens when you sense potential conflict, tension? Where do you go? So these are the things that trigger this regressed part that many have in complex trauma. So what are some of the signs that you have stunted emotional growth? First is you have difficulty handling stress or emotions. Second, you just have a fear of intimacy, fear of being vulnerable, fear of anybody getting too deep or too close, because you might get into stuff that you're not ready for. Or when there's problems in your relationships, you resort to passive aggressive type of things. You blame everybody for your problems. You aren't present. You're not good at being present. You're not good at being open and having intimacy in a relationship. So intimate relationships you don't do well if there's not an activity to keep you busy doing stuff together. You struggle with just connecting with yourself, being alone with yourself, reflecting, accepting your personal responsibility in situations, really wanting to look at, where do I need to grow? What are areas that are weak and vulnerable in me that I need to look at to try to figure out what's going on here? There's something in you that resists doing that. Then you have trouble with emotional regulation. You either dysregulate very easily or you quickly suppress emotions. But you're not good at dealing with emotions, being honest about emotions, feeling and expressing emotions. And then you have trouble with conflict. You are afraid of conflict. You either go, I'm going to fight you and win no matter what, or I'm going to avoid conflict. Conflict always leads to pain. And so you don't have conflict resolution skills. So what you realize is, because of the fear you have with emotions, with conflict, with intimacy, with connecting with yourself, with connecting with others, you've avoided learning all kinds of tools to do those things. You've gone to other tools, fight, flight, or freeze tools, and you stayed stuck in that regressed state. So I think when people look at complex trauma, they quickly identify this regressed state, and they see that very quickly. But what they don't realize is that there's also a progressed state. So think of the child who, they don't like social settings. They're not good at that. And so instead of learning the tools, because they don't like conflict, they don't like tension, they don't like not knowing what to talk about, they don't like vulnerability, they don't like unknown, they don't like silence in conversations. So instead of having to deal with that and learn tools, they go to, I am going to become a nerd. I'm going to live in my head. I'm going to analyze everything. I'm going to read books. I am going to be a problem solver. I'm going to fix people. And they get good at it. Or they go, I'm going to be really good in music. I'm going to be really good in sports. And they get super good because they're talented. It suits their personality. And so others validate them for that. And they go, wow. Or they go, okay, I don't like having to deal with people honestly, because I always get hurt. I never want to be vulnerable. I never want to truly connect. So I'm going to go to fawning. I'm going to be a people pleaser. I'm going to be highly attuned to the needs of others. And I am going to be a chameleon, and I'm going to respond to them and meet their needs and do whatever they want and get them to like me. And everybody goes, you are the most wonderful person, the most giving person. You are great socially. You can talk about anything. And so what you do when you meet a person is you find out all of their likes and they become your likes. You research them. You get good at talking about them. And people just love you. You get validated that. And you look like a social guru. And you are super good at interacting with people. You can make small talk for hours. You can be the most funny, warm, wonderful person to have at a social setting. But man, you are dying inside. You're not authentic at all. So somebody has said this: maladaptive progressed development occurs when a child grows up too fast in response to trauma, neglect, or difficult circumstances. Instead of progressing in a healthy, natural way, the child develops advanced but unhealthy survival skills that serve to protect them, but ultimately stunt their emotional well-being. So they get really good at people pleasing, at fawning, and they get all kinds of validation, and they look super mature for their age, but yet they're emotionally stunted. Those are not healthy tools. Those are survival tools. That's what they had to resort to keep from being rejected, to keep from being hurt. But everybody loves them and validates them for them. And so another way to look at this is the child develops these because they didn't have parents to teach them how to deal with all these different situations. And so they had to go into survival maladaptive things. They found a couple things that really got them validation and really seemed to work and got everybody to like them. And they pursued that with great gusto. and it seemed to work. But now in adult relationships, their partner, their children said, yeah, but you're not authentic. You're not truly connecting. You're not truly present. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you like. And things begin to fall apart. Tension builds. So let me give you some key characteristics of those who've got this kind of progressed part. So some of the emotional indicators is they develop a premature independence. You go, wow, that kid is so good on their own. They know how to take care of themselves. They know how to take care of everybody else. Premature independence, heightened responsibility. They get parentified. They take care of everybody else's emotions. They take care of mom and dad. They take care of their siblings. They're great at doing chores. They're the hero child. They are always the caregiver. So they have that as indicators that, whoa, they've grown up way too fast. They weren't allowed to be a kid. They became an adult too early. Other behavioral signs is they look like they have it all together. Everybody just looks at them and they're put together on the outside. Their emotions always seem to be under control. They're very logical. They're analytical. And they go, wow, this kid has got it all together. But yet they avoid vulnerability. And they demonstrate this very mature, unusually mature ability to solve problems. So those are some indicators. And then cognitive indicators they are able to think and process information kind of beyond their age group. So it's not just that they're like a prodigy. There's something more going on here, that this child's escaped into their head. This child has escaped into the safe place of an analytical academic world that they got validated for. And what is important to realize is that often there's so much in their head that their emotions get neglected. They don't really even enter their emotional world. So again, signs of a maladaptive progressed development is you get the parentified child. We talked about that. Caretaking roles, overly mature, suppressing their own needs, feeling responsible for everybody else, and acting emotionally like everybody else, always serious, always under control. So there's an emotional suppression where they just avoid expressing emotions too much, almost a stoic thing. They avoid expressing their needs because they might get rejected. They avoid being vulnerable. All of that suppression is happening. And when they have distress, they don't seek help. They retreat inward. They go alone. They never cry because then they'd be a burden. Then others might judge them. Then what you will see is there's a hypervigilance and this control, hyper control. They need to be in control of all situations. They need to be in control of themselves at all times. They never want to be surprised. They want to know details. They're very cautious. They're almost kind of a rigid, serious all the time. They can't relax or play or be too casual because then they might lose control. So that is there in them. Then there tends to be a perfectionism and an overachievement. So they are going to do things perfectly, or they're going to just work all the time. That's where their value comes from. That keeps them busy. That keeps them from being vulnerable. That keeps them from relationships. They just have to go, go, go. And so they begin to burn themselves out. But man, they are good at what they do. And then there's dissociation that begins to happen. They are disconnecting from emotions, disconnecting from having to connect with people, disconnecting from the events around them in social settings, escaping to their head. And so that might appear that they're being mature, but they're actually shut down emotionally. Then you see this fawning, people pleasing, avoiding conflict. They fear disapproval so much that they suppress their needs, their desires. They get to know everybody else's needs. They take care of everybody else. They become a chameleon and be what everybody else wants them to be. So that's kind of what's happening with this progressed part. They're looking really good, but man, there's other things happening below the surface that are starting to be detected in their emotions, etc. But then let me take that out to long-term consequences that you begin to see. The longer the person just kind of has this progress part, but there's still a regress part that they avoid, is they begin to have more and more trouble with emotions. They tried to repress them, but they can't anymore. And so now they start to get some emotional dysregulation happen. They have more and more trouble with relationships because they have such a fear of vulnerability. They become so overly responsible that they burn themselves out. They live now with chronic stress and they don't have a clue who they are. So those are the long-term consequences. Now, let me take it in another direction. So what I want you to see is that a person has a regressed part inside of them and a progressed part. They're in the same body. So they live together. So here's what you will see in people is that they can oscillate between the two. So their progressed part is all their functional that they get validated for adaptations. So that may dominate most of their life. They're just really good at business, really good at social, really good at analyzing stuff, really good at problem solving, really good at organizing. And they excel in that and they get validated for that. And so that you see much of the time. But then something triggers fear, stress, and all of a sudden the regress part comes out. And they go back to acting like a 5-year-old. So that is the reality of what happened. But let me take it further. There's tyrannical forces in this system. So the progress part hates the regress part because it's embarrassed by it. It's embarrassed by that little 5-year-old that comes out. It wants to try to make sure that 5-year-old never gets exposed. So it hates that regress part. And so it's important to understand is there's a shame element here. So the repressed part feels shame. It hates that it acts so childlike. The progressed part, it's got shame that made it try to compensate by being there. And now they hate each other. So the progressed part is always judging the regressed part. It's always condemning it. It feels superior to it. It's sitting in judgment on it. But you see, both are controlled by shame. Now, the repressed part sometimes longs for healing, but it's got so much fear, it's afraid of healing because it might get hurt. The progressed part, it doesn't think it needs healing. It just looks at that regressed part and thinks that's the problem. And so it's not going to look at getting healing until it begins to realize that its progressed part are actually maladaptations that are now causing their relationships to have trouble and that are causing them to hurt the people that they love. Then maybe it realizes, okay, I need to heal some stuff too. All of these coping tools that I have, part of it is healthy, but there's a whole part that's not healthy. And I need to start figuring out what's going on inside of me. So what I want you then to realize is there's an internal rebellion between the progressed part and the regressed part. So sometimes the regressed part, it gets so tired of this progressed part, judging it, looking down on it, trying to control it, trying to keep it from coming out, that it just rebels. It lashes out. It acts impulsively. It does stuff to create fires. And so all of a sudden, what the progress part realizes is, I'm trying to control this, but I can't totally control it because it's like a defiant little child with ODD, and it's going to rebel and act out. The other thing to realize is the regress part and progress part, they coexist, but they never communicate except to judge each other. They don't try to understand each other. They don't try to understand why they are the way they are. There's no communication between the two. There's just tension between the two. So what do you do to heal this? So understand, first of all, that this is what's happening inside of you. And so this is really, to me, why inner child work and internal family systems has been so helpful for people with complex trauma, because they look at that regress part, repressed part as the wounded inner child, the exile, and they begin to understand it. Part of it can be kind of firefighter stuff too, but then they see the progress part as kind of the managers and all the different internal parts that are working, but yet in conflict and embarrassed of each other. And so internal family systems, inner child work has been wonderful in helping people begin to heal and bring both of these things. One looks healthy, but it's not. One looks very unhealthy, but it's just trying to help the child survive. Both are actually survival tools. It's helping work it through, integrate so we get healthy. That's the therapy part of healing complex trauma, beginning to understand these two parts of me. To do it well, you need self-compassion. You need to allow yourself to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to not do it perfectly. And then you have to reconnect with yourself and learn to connect to emotions and process emotions and pain. And then you need safe relationships, because all of this had to happen because you were in unsafe relationships. Now have safe relationships where you can truly connect. That helps in the healing of all of this. Let me take it further. Healing the relationship between the progressed part and the regressed part. That becomes an important piece in all of this. And so it's getting to your cortex and basically saying, I see both of you. I want to value both of you. Both of you have played a role. And so I don't see one as bad and the other good. I see both of you as important in my life. You kept me safe, but there's maladaptations that we need to be able to heal, get healthy tools, and integrate. So you're creating an internal dialogue where you're listening to the progressed parts, you're listening to the regressed parts, you're talking about, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What's your fear? What tools are you using? And you're beginning to help them work through that. But you're helping also the regress part to talk about its pain that caused it to become stunted so that it can start to release the pain. Because it regressed because the brain said we need extreme protection. So we are going to shut down here and just go to fight, flight, freeze. Let them begin to unburden that stuff, but also help the progress part to realize that these things that I have developed, yes, there's based on some healthy stuff, but I've taken it to some very unhealthy places. So I need to distinguish between the healthy and the unhealthy. I need to be able to be human, because this is making me a clone of somebody else. This is making me fake. I got to heal the shame. I got to understand healthy ways of coping besides just fawning and people pleasing. All of that takes time. All of that, you need therapy and people to help you with it. So I really hope that this just helps you understand a little bit more about the internal dynamics that are happening inside of you because of complex trauma.